That's great. Special shout out from Dana the man, and to you personally. Is he a good friend of yours?
I wouldn't go that far, but yeah, he's the boss.
Is he?
Yeah, definitely.
It's great to see the, just some of the progress UFC's made. Like in Asia particularly, what are you most proud of?
Yeah, I think there's a lot that we can be proud of out here. When we first started in 2010, and we can't take all of the credit for it. It's been a fast-growing sport and certainly has made a mark globally. But back in 2010, I think we were even behind the rest of the world. We were just getting into our broadcast relationship with Fox out there, hitting the mainstream. So I think what I'd say I'd be most proud of is the direction that we've steered this ship, is the really getting it into the mainstream from. And back then, quite frankly, a fringe sport, a small group of fans, very passionate fans back then. But there's a lot of cleanup to be done, especially online with the different clips that were out there at the time, the infringement, cleaning up the perceptions of the sport, branding it as an elite athlete, competition, best fighters in the world. And I think we've come a long way in that regard. So I'd say that's really been great to see, to take that step forward, hopefully it continues in the future.
Well, you've made huge investments in the region, none greater than China with the Performance Institute. Do you want to just talk maybe just a little bit about where did that idea begin? Like, why did you create that? I mean, it's such a significant investment. If you could just talk a little bit about why you did it and how it's tracking now.
Sure. Well, the Performance Institute, the original 1.0, if you will, is based in Las Vegas. And really what we found was, I think it was kind of 2 years before we built it and had the concept and the rationale for it. We went through a slate of injuries, that decimated some of our main events. And if you can imagine the marketing muscle and everything else that goes behind promoting an event, to have it drop off at the end due to injury, we're just encountering a lot of that. And it was really because the sport itself has some old school beginnings, right? They weren't up to speed on the recent developments in training philosophy, in recovery, in strength and conditioning, all of the areas where you need to use to become an elite athlete. So they were in a lot of ways doing it wrong. And so the Performance Institute was established to tackle that question, to make ourselves right up there with the rest of the major sports in the world, to give our athletes that resource to come in and become really professional athletes on the world stage and train like the rest of the athletes in the world as well, and set those types of benchmarks. For the Performance Institute in Shanghai, it certainly was an extension of that concept to be a resource for all of our rostered athletes, so all of them can come at any time and get help in any one of those areas, whether it's strength and conditioning, nutrition, physical therapy, injury rehabilitation, all of it. But we also added another component to it, where we identified a need to, I'll put it simply, bridge the gap in talent. The rest of the world certainly started, and when I say the rest of the world, you talk about the US or Europe or Brazil or Canada. Some of these markets really had an earlier start than Asia in general, and thus the talent, the pool of talent was more developed. And so what we needed to do, and what we ultimately did do, was build the academy and then build the Performance Institute, and then start what we call the UFC Academy, to help these up-and-coming promising athletes from the entire region, and that is our ultimate goal, to give them that bridge, right? To give them that experience, that top-class training, all of the resources that they're going to need to have success in the Octagon, to give them that opportunity, really, so that when they actually and part of the recruitment process, really identify what the talent is out there, bring them into our system, into Contender Series or Road to UFC, or even some of the top mixed martial arts promotions in the world. As you know, in the UFC, we don't take any amateurs in. They're all professionals that are coming in. So to put them in these situations, see how they do, use it as an evaluation tool to ultimately bring them into the UFC. And that's the investment we made, because we felt we needed to kind of push and support the talent pool.
I think once you mentioned UFC has an ambition to get about, what, is it 10% of the total roster of fighters out of, is it Asia or specifically China?
Asia.
Asia.
And you know, that would be it's a big, hairy, audacious goal, if you will. Yeah. Right now, we have about 650 rostered athletes. Half of them come from the U.S., half of them come from outside of the U.S.
Yep.
And so, you know, we would like to drive that from Asia, the athletes from Asia to that 60 or 70 level, right? Athletes level. And you know, we're getting there. So,
yes. Well, it's great to see Zhang Weili become a world champion, and
that's certainly, it's exciting. She became a world champion. Of course, she lost the belt to Rose, and now she has an opportunity to fight for it again. So it's a great story.
Rose 3, right? Coming up.
Rose, it's Carla Esparza. That's right. And her in Madison Square Garden, November 12th.
Huge moment then for her in New York. So today, I want to maybe break up today into two parts. First, we'll just talk about some of the challenges that you've been tackling in Asia, specifically over the last 12 months or 24 months during COVID. And then we'll talk a bit about looking ahead, what's in the future for the UFC and how you're tackling partners and the growth in the region. So just talking on COVID period for you in Asia. Dana talked about the UFC was the first major sport back in action. It was awesome to see. You must have had huge challenges, unable to get the fighters to the PI and train for either the local domestic programming, and talk me through some of the challenges you had there, and what did you do about that?
Yeah, I think this period of time, the last few years, have been challenging for all of us.
Yeah.
We were the first event back after the pandemic broke out. In a lot of ways that allowed us to hone our skills in operating in this environment. It's come. And it's evolved now, so it's not quite as much preparation and standard operating procedure and all of those things to kind of host an event in a safe and effective manner. But we certainly carried that expertise in. For us in Asia, though, we didn't. We were able to carry on, right? We have the Apex in Las Vegas, our own arena. We were able to shift there. And start to run events on a regular basis. That was always an option for us. So the programming never stopped. So even though we weren't doing events in Asia for the past few years, we were able to kind of, and Fight Island as well. So we found opportunities to continue the broadcast and support all our broadcast partners in the region. But as to your point, the events certainly were on hold. And so we were very excited to come back to Singapore. It was our second international event. We had just done the UK prior to that. It was our first pay-per-view event internationally after the pandemic. So it was a big deal for us, and we got a great response. But that was certainly a challenge because we didn't know how. I mean, as early as I would say April here in Singapore, there was still capacity, limitations. There was still sort of unknowns as far as do you need to test before you go to the arena and all of those sorts of things. So we had to manage our way through that, but ultimately it was a big success. And then with regards to our athletes themselves, again, they're flying out in many cases to the U.S. or to Abu Dhabi and Fight Island to compete. And that was certainly a challenge as well. Everywhere in the world, but particularly for us in Asia, I think some of the standards were a little different. So getting them out, visa requirements, all of those, nobody was issuing visas.
You're managing all that for those athletes?
Yeah, myself and my team, of course.
Yeah. Am I right? You had a team in Bali, is that right? Or you had a team in Indonesia?
Yeah.
It was sort of housing a lot of the Chinese fighters or other regional fighters?
Yeah, we did, and that was one of the, again, related to these challenges was, we had a lockdown in Shanghai for several months. We were all a part of that. It was tough to get the fighters, preparing for this opportunity of a lifetime in the road to UFC whilst stuck in their room. Our coaches and our trainers did a great job in putting these programs together so they wouldn't lose everything. But I mean, the life of a professional athlete and the way they train is it requires the resources and the facilities and all of that sort of thing. So we ultimately did make the short-term decision to move at least those competitors that were going to be competing in the Road to UFC, which we started in June, out to Bali. to train there for a bit in advance of this. They will be returning back to the PI now that things are loosening up a bit.
Great. So you talked, I think Dana mentioned a little bit about the Singapore event, sold out, or there was a great attendance at 6 a.m. in the morning on a Sunday.
Yeah.
When can we expect to see in Asia, like in Asia time zone, like, great fights in this region, supporting this region?
Very soon. I mean, we are taking a look at our calendar for 2023 in particular.
Yeah.
We haven't announced anything yet, but we certainly have plans to come back to the region where possible. And again, it is a balance between, our desire and selfish desire for myself and the Asia team to get events going back again here. But it's also, we want to do things that make sense, right? It's always an opportunity cost. So we have to identify out here the markets that make sense. Whether that's immigration policy, COVID policies, vaccination requirements, all of those sorts of things. Because again, we could easily do things back in the Apex or all of the US or other countries, quite frankly, that have just completely opened. So we have to identify which ones that those are. Fortunately enough, it seems to be heading in the right direction in a lot of places in Asia. So, you can, we anticipate making some big announcements for upcoming events in Asia very soon.
Are you optimistic on China with the possible China event in 23, or are you, I guess you just wait to see how?
Sure, there's a bit of waiting, to see how things shape up. A lot of things that are a bit out of our control. But certainly, again, we've made the investment there. When we look at that roster goal, Chinese athletes certainly represent the biggest piece of it right now when it comes to the Asian pool of talent, and I think that speaks to some of our investment there. I mean, we also want, and the original concept behind the UFC Academy was to be regional, right? To be a regional resource, and that was one of the challenges. We had to focus really just on our Chinese athletes because we couldn't get people in and out, and so. Very hopeful to see the situation improve so that we can start to really fulfill the vision for the UFC Academy, as we intended it when we opened in 2019.
Yeah. With developing your sport, and you talked a little bit about the optics on the sport a decade ago, and it was, it can be somewhat challenging for government or parents and young people to get involved in the sport when they see the brutality of the sport, but it is an elite athlete mixed martial arts organization. Is with one championship also flying the mixed martial arts flag, I imagine they must be a benefit for the UFC in some ways, because they grow the sport in the region, and do you see them as what benefits do you see with that one championship offers the UFC in this region?
Yeah, I get asked that question a lot, and I think the more people who are involved in mixed martial arts, both at the professional and the amateur level, is beneficial to the UFC. Ultimately, we don't take any athletes into the UFC who are not already professionals. There's no amateurs making that bridge from amateur MMA to professional coming right into the UFC. Or very rare cases, maybe like Bo Nichols, who is like the all-time great as far as wrestling at Penn State and everything else. He still had to go through Contender Series and also fight in other promotions before coming in to the UFC. So it just goes to show the level of talent and where they need to be in order to have success. And so, these domestic regional promotions definitely offer the opportunity to get that experience, to build the records, to build momentum, to build name recognition, to be noticed by our matchmakers to pull them in. So in that regard, from a talent pool perspective, it's quite important. And then I think that if you were to ask, we're firmly entrenched as the premier mixed martial arts organization globally, right? People understand that there are other mixed martial arts organizations around, but I think when people want to watch the best of the best compete in MMA, I would be hard pressed to find any fan out there in the world that would say that's not happening in the UFC. And so if if that's starting to happen, the exposure, and they're finding out about the sport through these other means, then fantastic, because they're going to find their way to the UFC. So for us, it is largely viewed as a positive.
And if you want to watch a real fight, you watch UFC. That's what you're saying.
Well, they're all real fights.
Okay. Let's not pick a fight with one championship.
Yeah.
We love those guys.
Yeah.
Okay, looking ahead, because I see we've got about 5 or 6 minutes left. What does the broadcast landscape look like for you looking ahead? And how are you sort of approaching the new sort of structural changes that's gone on in the last 12 months in Southeast Asia with Fox, and also in China still sort of developing? How do you look at the region from a strategy point of view in broadcast?
You know, we want to be where our fans are, right? We want to, as Dana said, we want to make sure that we're working with the best broadcasters in the business. The best broadcasters have the most influence, have the most accessibility, and that also comes to content partnerships that we work with them. I mean, it is telling the story. It is being able to create programming that draw people in, the casual fan base and audience in. It is the ability to cross-promote as well. Right? If they are a big and broad broadcaster, not just involved in sports, but in entertainment, in drama, and everything else, that's going to allow us to get that exposure and draw these other people in. And again, we have sort of that, it's a global platform, so, you know, for instance, somebody might not be a huge fan of football, but they're going to watch the World Cup. You know, in a similar way, somebody might not be a huge fan of mixed martial arts, but they'll watch a mega event that we have, a Conor event or a John Jones or whoever that is, just because it's creating this kind of buzz. And so for us, we definitely always are looking to do so. In the past 12 months, as you say, you know, we made a transition from being on a pan-regional channel to, you know, market by market, and I think it's benefited us a lot in a lot of ways, because these guys are the biggest platforms in each of their markets, whether that's True or Astro or, you know, so in Singapore with Singtel and StarHub and Mola. So, you know, they definitely are a master of that space. When we bring events into town, they probably have a lot more promotional resources that we can lean on to get the word out about ticket sales and everything else. And I think, you know, as a macro trend, things are going more and more digital now, particularly in China. You know, we've been able to benefit there as well. There's a lot of flexibility offered by that platform, right? A lot of consumer choice in their ability to consume the content whenever they want, however they want, and that's a big driving point for us. The fans come first. Without them, we're really nothing. And so we want to make sure that we're servicing by riding these trends and making sure that we're positioned in a way that people can, you know, enjoy the UFC and become fans from wherever they are as a starting point.
Yeah, right. You're making more money today than you were 12 months ago with this new media structure in the region?
Yes.
You benefited from that?
Yeah, there's a commercial benefit for sure.
Yeah. With just looking at the commercial partnership strategy, so branded partnerships for the UFC. UFC must be well over a dozen, right, global partners that work with the property. Is there pressure on you? Is there domestic partners? Is it in the region? Is there regional partners? Or is it just global partners with the UFC? How do you approach that?
I think global partners are going to come first, and these are companies who have ambition to kind of market and gain exposure and, you know, draw that brand association outside of just their home market. So they could be Chinese companies, Singaporean companies, or whatever, but they have global ambitions, right? So or they're already established globally, and those are the type of partners that we are particularly useful for. Just because, you know, if you look at the sports landscape, there's only a handful of truly global sports, right? Football is one of them. The whole world watches football outside of the U.S. You know, you have basketball as well, and mixed martial arts. You know, I mean, everybody in the world watches this sport. Not everybody, I shouldn't say everybody watches the sport, but there are fans in every single corner of, there's fans in every country in the world, is what I'm trying to say. And, you know, for a one-stop, you know, we can hit all of these fans and gain that brand recognition and everything else, it works. So for us, our focus has increasingly gone towards global partnerships.
Global partnerships, That makes it easy for you then, doesn't it?
Well, a lot of them come from this part of the world.
We need to give the IMG guys some work, right?
Absolutely.
just wrapping up then, what will be different about UFC in Asia over the next 5 years? What does success look like for you? Do you think what new sort of opportunities or either through talent, like a new personality you think will emerge through the region, or what will be different in the next 5 years with UFC?
The strategy remains the same as it was in 2010, as it was in 2016. I mean, we're just really continuing that strategy. The vision is global iconic sport. We have to become a mainstream sport. Now, I think the changes that we could see ahead is, what's going to happen with Web 3.0, which is a big, discussion point for this conference as well. Yep. How are we prepared to engage with it, engage with our fan base who are going to be there? So that's certainly something going forward that we have a lot of plans in place. We have a partnership with Unity, who has a technology called Metacast, for instance. And nobody knows how this is all going to look. Nobody knows whether or not it's going to actually be a Ready Player One scenario, or if it's going to be completely different. Nobody knows which are the platforms that are going to be the most influential and powerful. We just are preparing ourselves for all of those eventualities and making sure that if and when it does happen, that we can continue to service our fan base on these newly developed platforms. And I think that that's the most uncertain thing in the next 5 years or so.
Yeah, right. Well, we're out of time, but I wish you all the best. Wish to see a great personality emerge in. I mean, Zhang Weili's fantastic. Yeah. Leech is fantastic.
Absolutely.
But yeah, all the best with your success, and thanks for the time. I'm sorry we didn't get more time to chat.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Kevin.